We are operational. Let us launch our opening logos. Welcome to Evolution Hour on the wee hours of the morning of the 30th of June, 2025. Clickety-clack, analog devices. The world that I came from in the ancient 20th century. And don't forget our cute little website that has a bunch of freebies that everybody gets to have if they want to download them, share them freely, yada, yada, yada. We're kind of lucky here in the Pacific Northwest. We're not in quite the hideous heat dome that seems to be afflicting everybody else. So cross fingers, had a little bit of sprinkle of rain yesterday. So we are, of course, continuing Titans, the stupid creationist book. And this is a Luskin week. So we'll be going into some more of the Luskin papers. And also my latest edition of Acts and Facts that showed up that I thought was worthy of a comment about pending coming attractions that will be inspired by this particular episode. We'll get off to that in just a mo. So our little Titans crowd are continuing now with a bunch of stuff on dinosaur eggs. And actually fewer sources. There's a lot of repetition and all that. I'll be able to give you one full source. Fortunately, the neatest one, which is the first dinosaur egg, was soft by Norell 20, which somehow escaped my attention the first time around. I think because it was published online well ahead of the print issue, and by the time it got up to there, I somehow must have missed the thing. Anyway, the meat of the thing will be a chart that's a couple pages in that goes into just a great deal of detail, pinning down what dinosaur eggs are in relation to birds and the soft-shelled potential for early dinosaur eggs and so forth, and therefore how Sarfati and Tay are misrepresenting it. There's a second paper from Legendre et al. 2020 on a soft sauropod egg. Sorry, that one isn't open access that I can find anywhere, but I will be putting up the abstract of it so at least you can see what the hell is going on that. Anyway, Sarfati and Tay were clearly riffing off of this in part because of peptide bonds and chelating ligands that were found. Ooh, soft tissue-y things. Well, remember, chemical bonds and that can form quite independently of the young earth creationist dogma. But here's one that this, by the way, was mainly coming up on this chart that I just showed you. The neat part of it is that they're clearly missing the content on this one, to the point of where it's really quite an egregious misrepresentation, because they go on in the book to say that it's these soft-shelled eggs closely resemble not bird eggs, but reptilian soft-shelled eggs such as turtles, pterosaurs, lizards, snakes, and mosasaurs. Yeah, well, that's the maneuver that's relating to it, because the farther you are from the bird lineage, you have dinosaurs that are distant cousins. They're going to be different from the ones that are the most close to birds. And in the phylogeny on that chart, the neat bit is that our little theropods here and are right smack dab next to birds. And so, yes, they've got bits about the ornithopods and pachycephalosaurs and others that are sauropods and various other ones that are farther back in the phylogeny and in the structure. But the ones that are closest to birds phylogenetically are the ones that are the closest to birds in terms of structure. So they're either not paying attention to what's in the paper, or if they are, they're misrepresenting it. I'm charitable and will simply conclude that they are really not paying too much of attention to the content. So that will be the first part. A little interlude then has to do with this Acts and Facts thing that just came up. The magazine is now on a bi-monthly, so this is the July-August 2025 issue. It used to be a monthly, and so you can see the number of issues now is cut in half. But in terms of content, it's quite surprising, because They've got a thing from Randy Galuza on Common Design Case Study, which turns out to be a slightly retread version of a 2015 thing he'd already put up. They got a Yosemite National Park thing, part 1, which is also kind of just retreading a bunch of stuff from Brian Thomas. Mega sequences down under support progressive global flood. That's also basically just retreading the measures. There's a new one on the Scopes Monkey Trial, a battle of worldviews, and I'm kind of intrigued to see how they're going to spin that one. But the only really substantive, in the sense of novel material, is a long non-coding RNAs, The Unsung Heroes of the Genome by Jeffrey Tompkins, which actually has some more recent papers stuck in there that are not the older branch. So what I'll probably be doing later on, burrow through that to find out what all is in this material. Then we'll go ahead and make that the topic of a future part 2 evolution hour, because it'll be very intriguing given how much dust has settled on the non-coding RNA issue and the topic that we're constantly running through with the Luskin report, it'll be intriguing to see what hay he's trying to make out of all of this stuff. So anyway, which brings us down to the Luskin thing. 3 more papers for you on that list, all from 2020. There's a Herard and Follow and Walkley on that A to I editing thing that we've gone into in previous weeks. And again, I suspect because it's a direct reference to there being like millions of potential target sites, that must have just really revved them up. Whereas there's only 50 to 150,000 in mice. So it's varying clearly because of the nature of the repetitive elements involved versus the ALU in the one and the other. But once again, this paper is clearly talking about the need to edit these ALUs. If not, they tend to form bonds, and a lot of this, that's topics that have come up previously. Then this other paper from 2020, Lo Geodesi, which is trying to quantify what's going on in terms of what editing is being done where. Both of those are directly alluding to the fact that there is disease aspects that come about by the failure for them to kick in. So remember, the ALUs are the supposed junk DNA part that they're contending are doing something, when in fact the purpose of this paper is a discussion of how you don't want the ALUs to be doing anything, otherwise they get into trouble. So are they paying any attention to this content? I have no idea. The third paper is even more fun because it is bumping into hominids and our human language cognition evolution. Now we're up that little brain component again, because remember, we've alluded to that on many occasions, that one of the rare areas where AI in and become now dynamically functional has to do with chemistry. And you wonder why they thought this one was a smart one to bring up, because it turns out all the core modules involved here are common humans, chimpanzees, and orangutans. And it's just the cis regulation signatures that are diverging so significantly for humans due to insertions and deletions, those things that are drivers of all of this stuff. And by the way, they're studying like 1,403 vertebrate spots. So I think it's a fair representation that these 3 papers are not helping the case any for intelligent design, and 2 of them are directly relating to the theodicy problem again, which is bringing our average again up to about a third of the papers so far are theodicy triggers, which I find very interesting. Just as with Sarfati and Tay, these new material are pushing them up easily, bumping into the 2/3 of the papers that they're citing are being misrepresented. That's really high for creationists. Typically, the average seems to run about 50%. We'll find out how that balances out as we as we plow on farther down into the mix. There's an awful lot of ongoing source citation of creation material, largely CMI stuff again. And so that's still running about, 40% of the material that they're doing in their book is simply retread creationist stuff. It's an intriguing phenomenon to look at. Fun to see how much farther as they plow down into birds. We haven't quite hit what I think must be the case about fiducia, and whether or not they and brush stuff and things are just decades out of sync. I'm not holding my breath that there's going to be any allusion to like Alibardi paper on origin of placodes with feather and hair evolution and all that stuff, which has been technical literature that's been around for quite a while. And so if it fails to show up, then that is an indication of how incredibly insular they are. But as we've already seen, they are constantly channeling you towards a preconceived conclusion in spite of the content of the papers that they're bringing up, which I find not surprising, but it also would explain why nobody should be in the least bit surprised that creationists have contributed nothing whatsoever to the major sciences in the last 100 years. And the young Earth creationist branch, definitely not. Let me put our little thank you note for our I am most grateful for everybody that's been able to stick with us all of this time. Come on, move my little stupid little mouse around so that I can get back to my main screen here. I am so used to using a mouse on the laptop that it's kind of frustrating that, come on, let's see. There we go. That's up on screen. Thanks everybody who has helped out in all this area that is holding on. Again, I cannot be shocked if in the course of the coming year or two, as the economic conditions become much bumpier, we may lose some of that. But so long as you're hanging in there, kids, I'm keeping up with the work. So thank you very much on that little puppy. Also continue to do an update on where things are with the cute little cosmology chapter for Rocks for Their Volume 2. Oh, golly gosh, it's fun stuff. I had always had a great deal of trepidation about getting into the cosmology area back when I first started my project back in the late 1990s, early 2000s. And so much of the material that would be readily accessible now simply wasn't. So the kinds of technical papers in the monthly notices of the Royal Astronomical Society and astronomy and astrophysics and all this stuff that's just fingertip away would have been very, very difficult to have acquired back at that time. So in some respects, I'm kind of happy that I didn't dive into the material. And there's also been so many upsets in the region in terms of how the technology is advanced and how the precision goes. One of the things that pops up that we're going to be discussing the history of in the course of the chapter is how do you measure how far stars away? And you can do it by parallax. And when I would be growing up back in the 1950s and 60s, you really could only get out to a few hundred light years with the parallax method. That's because our atmosphere produces an awful lot of blur that makes it difficult to do. But that means that if you're not in the atmosphere, maybe you can be much more precise. So a variety of the Hipparcos probe that went up in 1980 something, and then Gaia that replaced it, have just totally expanded the boundary layer of how you do parallax. So that now they can measure millions, and the Gaia probe is continuing, and they're aiming to do ultimately billions of stars out hundreds of thousands of light years. Now, that's not enough to get us to Andromeda Galaxy, but it's colossally farther than the 6,000-year boundary layer of young Earth creationism. So that's a critical factor. And you still find most creationists just kind of don't think this one through. There's only two examples that I have in my notes so far that we'll be mentioning in the book about some creationists that kind of stick their foot in it on this. One is Tom Willis, the geocentrist creationist, who around 2002 or so was just referring to the Hipparchus probe, and it was just kind of sloughing it off. Well, yeah, they're not going to be able to measure other than just the inside of our galaxy. That's big enough, kid. But hilariously, a few years later, in one of Kent Hovind's spiels, he was flat out arguing that you can't even measure out past 100 light years reliably, which was obsolete for astronomy, ground-based, and was preposterously outdated by then, because by then the Hipparchus probe had already pushed the envelope out way farther than that. So it's just hilarious. And one of the incidents that we'll be bringing up that is one of the most delicious bits of science inference relates to how a guy back in the 19th century gave a really good ballpark, at least for a minimum distance, of how far Andromeda Galaxy had to be away. And this involved when they first were measuring parallax on inboard stars. The very first star that they ever measured this way with telescopes was 61 Cygni. That was a really dim star, so dim that it didn't show up on old star charts at all. It was something that only became visible during telescopes times, but they could see there was a proper motion. It was a moving star relative to its background. And so that one back in the 1830s or so, that was the very first one that they were able to do a precise parallax on and establish that it was like 10 light years away. Well, there was a geologist in France who had one of those little, I can't say light bulb, it'd be a gas light in those days. Actually, not even barely gas lights back in the 1840s. That he did one of the most ingenious pieces of reasoning in all of astronomy. Because once you know that 61 Cygni is 10 light years away, then you have a measure of how bright it is absolutely. So you know this is how bright it is from 10 light years away. You would know how bright it would be if it were only 5 light years away, or whether it was 100 light years away. You now have a metric that you can play with. And you can also measure how dim Andromeda Galaxy is. So even if Andromeda has only one 61 Cygni bright star, how far away would it need to be in order for it to be as dim as it is? Well, he came up with about a couple 100,000 light years, which is off by an order of magnitude. But the point is that was giving a boundary layer for it. So that was just a delicious little matter, which, by the way, tends not to get discussed much in the creationist literature either. So all of this bit about how you measure stuff and how you work out what things are and who's doing the work and who isn't, and the rationales that go on. I was just watching a debate from some people who probably shouldn't have on the fine-tuning issue, which is a topic that's going to be discussed in great detail in the new book. And it was hilarious because the two people pro and con on fine-tuning were both wrong, and wrong for the same reason, because both of them were assuming that the fine-tuning constant values were correct. And so the pro guy was simply riffing off of that. He frequently mentioned, I think the cosmological constant was the example that he kept mentioning, and has had so in the little websites and stuff that he's posted on as well. All of this is going to be incorporated into the new book, so all the links and stuff will eventually be in there. But the other fellow that was arguing against it was arguing from an analytical logic point of view, which always makes my eyeballs grow weary. But he was simply assuming that the fundamental data were correct, and then kind of maneuvering around it through a convoluted logic trail as to the probabilities of universes occurring and so forth and so on. And so both of these were just time wasters, because, as we'll be showing in the book, and I suspect that the pro fine-tuning guy was riffing a lot off of Luke Barnes, who is one of the people that have written one of the books on this subject, because he's alluding to it, not directly in the video, but in the postings that the fellow has done. Barnes is kind of an interesting case because he started out as a a young Earth creationist, and he then kind of gave it up in the last few years. But so a lot of the fine-tuning material that he was starting to work up when he partnered up with another writer, in particular, are actually jumping off of a mindset that produces a young Earth creationist context. Anyway, we're going to be laying out the 10 major cosmological constants and what the actual values are. I think I flipped a little chart every once in a while. I still got some little annotations on the cute little thing, but that's going to be in our master book that will be laying down the issues not only of what the range is on the cosmological constants that can be varied, but also whether some of them have varied over time. And a third of them have potentially varied, not a lot, but a little, which pulls the rug out from under the notion that they can't vary at all. Or when you actually look up the numbers, and it required, it's another reason why I don't think I could have done this work 5 or 10 years ago, because so many of the technical papers that are bearing on this point at issue are ones that wouldn't have been publicly accessible. And in some cases, a lot of the work has just been done in the last 5 or 10 years. But it's basically pulled the rug out from under a lot of the numbers that were being done by Barrow, and particularly the Privileged Planet and the Luke Barnes book over a time about 10, 15, 20 years ago. And they've kind of retread the same arguments over and over again. But what I noticed in starting up this chapter was that they weren't giving the primary numbers of how much can it vary. And so half of the effort was involved tracking down what all of those were. And I was able to get everything except for one, the density parameter. Nobody who has brought this bloody thing up has laid out an upper boundary for just how much the density parameter can change before you get unpleasant circumstances, all else being equal. There's a number for the downside, but not for the upside. But all the other ones are able to pin down numbers, and there's been change of the numbers as time goes on, as they've done further analysis. One of the ones that's, oh, good gravy, it's the, it's not on the list because it doesn't really apply, but the weak nuclear force, some of the apologists have tried to argue that if the weak nuclear force were changed even a tad, that it would produce catastrophic effects. You wouldn't have nucleosynthesis, you wouldn't have star formations, etc. Well, turns out some recent studies have indicated that not only can you have nucleosynthesis, just takes way longer with a weak nuclear force, but you can still have that without any weak nuclear force at all. That was one of those where you go, whoa, okay, it could go to zero. And it still isn't necessarily due, because you just have more time in the universe to do some of these little things. So the physics has been really exciting and fun, and quite surprising in working out how really dated a lot of this stuff is. So when you find anybody that is still bringing up the fine-tuning argument, you want to ask them for what sources they're relying on, and you want to find out, are they recent? Because or websites that are rechanneling material. Jay Richards, the co-author of The Privileged Planet, is just recycling the same material over and over again. I don't think they really updated much of anything. And their original book had big problems in terms of how they were maneuvering around source material. They were being cherry picky even then, and it's not gotten better. So anyway, that gives you a little bit of an ongoing heads up about where things are going. I'm not seeing anybody in the overlay, so apparently we're on our own in terms of viewers at the moment. Anyway, so let me put up our advert. So we're getting close to a half hour. I can put up our rocks for their advertisement. And but old RJ, the little old man in Spokane, clinking around with his menus to get our screen share, etc., going. Come on. Boop. And fire away, kids. Yeah, and I'm anxious to. It's still a lot of work left to do. All the solar system formation, planets, and that stuff. There's elements. Polonium halos are going to be discussed in the cosmology chapter. A bunch of little sidebars, but a lot of the other material I've already got folded in. Then I'm anxious. I'm sure Jackson is anxious too, because I still got to get to the Noah's Lost World chapter. That I've got his part of it, and then there's going to be material that I'm putting in. And in fact, he just alerted me to a couple new papers that we'll want to include on some of the matters about adaptability and there's bird evolution, and there's a whole bunch of stuff about um, whole biogeographical elements in that. The whale section, whale evolution will be in there. And then, of course, all big stuff about paleogeography with the Grand Canyon, which is a really spectacular case study since you have a record that goes back billions of years there. You have a paleo worlds that exist long before there was life on land, in a world of bacterial life stretching back quite a long ways, but yet dynamic plate tectonics, things going on in the atmosphere, things going on in life, all during that period, as well as leading up to the wind up into the multicellularity stuff. So there's a lot of stuff going on in there. And then the human evolution chapter that'll also include material on the creationist tropes about Darwinian racism and all of that that gets done. Jerry Bergman and is a particularly offensive character here, just going berserk over it. It's been a hobby horse he's been running for decades, so I mean, it's not a new. There's not a lot of new horses running in the creationist field. Anyway, so we're coming up just about a half an hour. I don't see anybody in our overlay there, so I won't necessarily just blither blather on indefinitely. We'll curtail the stream here. Everybody stay safe. Watch out for temperature, heat domes. Watch out for rampaging Trumpista thugs and any of the other circumstances that are going to be keeping us very busy through the next few years. And we will see you all next week with another episode of the show. Watch out for the wooden penguins. Okie doke.